R.M.S. Titanic by Hanson W. Baldwin. The R.M.S. Titanic was a giant luxury cruise ship that left Southampton, England to sail to New York in April 1912. The ship hit an iceberg and sunk. Around 1,500 people died. The following article from 1934 describes the tragedy. The author researched ship's logs, interviews, and other records to write the article. Part 1. The White Star liner Titanic, the largest ship the world has ever known, sailed from Southampton on her maiden voyage to New York on April 10, 1912. The paint on her strakes was fair and bright. She was fresh from Harland and Wolfe's Belfast yards, strong in the strength in her 46,000 tons of steel, bent, hammered, shaped, and riveted through the 3 years of her slow birth. There was little fuss and fanfare at her sailing. Her sister ship, the Olympic, slightly smaller than the Titanic, had been in service for some months and to her had gone the thunder of the cheers. But the Titanic needed no whistling steamers or shouting crowds to call attention to her superlative qualities. Her bulk dwarfed the ships near her as longshoremen singled up her mooring lines and cast off the turns of heavy rope from the dock bollards. She was not only the largest ship afloat, but she was believed to be the safest. Carlyle, her builder, had given her double bottoms and had divided her hull into 16 watertight compartments, which made her, men thought, unsinkable. She had been built to be and had been described as a gigantic lifeboat. Her designers' dreams of a triple-screw giant, a luxurious floating hotel, which could speed to New York at 23 knots, and been carefully translated from blueprints and mold loft lines at the Belfast yards into the living reality. A Titanic sailing from Southampton, though quiet, was not wholly uneventful. As the liner moved slowly toward the end of her dock that April day, the surge of her passing sucked away from the quay the steamer New York, moored just to seaward of the Titanic's berth. There were sharp cracks as the Manila mooring lines of the New York parted under the strain. The frayed ropes writhed and twisted through the air and snapped down among the waving crowd of the pier. The New York swung toward the Titanic's bow, was checked and dragged back to the dock barely in time to avert a collision. Seamen muttered, thought it an ominous start. Past Spithead in the Isle of Wight, the Titanic steamed. She called at Cherbourg at dusk and then laid her course from Queenstown. At 1:30 p.m. on Thursday, April 11th, she stood out of Queenstown Harbor, screaming gulls soaring in her wake with 2,201 persons, men, women, and children aboard. Occupying the Empire bedrooms and Georgian suites of the first-class accommodations were many well-known men and women. Colonel John Jacob Astor and his young bride, Major Archibald Butt, military aide to President Taft, and his friend Frank D. Millet, the painter, John B. Thayer, vice president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, and Charles M. Hayes, president of the Grand Trunk Railway of Canada, W. T. Stead. The English journalist Jacques Futrelle, French novelist H.B. Harris, theatrical manager and Mrs. Harris, Mr. and Mrs. Isidore Strauss, and J. Bruce Ismay, chairman and managing director of the White Star Line. Down in the plain wooden cabins of the steerage class were 706 immigrants to the land of promise, and trimly stowed in the great holds was a cargo valued at $420,000. Oak beams, sponges, wine, calabashes, and odd miscellany of the common and the rare. The Titanic took her departure on Fastnet Light and headed into the night, laid her course for New York. She was due at Quarantine the following Wednesday morning. Sunday dawned fair and clear. The Titanic steamed smoothly toward the west, faint streamers of brownish smoke trailing from her funnels. The purser held services in the saloon in the morning. On the steerage deck aft the immigrants were playing games and the Scotsman was puffing "The Campbells Are Coming" on his bagpipes in the midst of the uproar. At 9 a.m. a message from the steamer Caronia sputtered into the wireless shack. Captain, Titanic, westbound steamers report bergs, growlers, and field ice 42 degrees north from 49 degrees to 51 degrees west, 12th April. It was cold in the afternoon, the sun was brilliant, but the Titanic, her screws turning over at 75 revolutions per minute, was approaching the banks. In the Marconi cabin, second operator Harold Bride, earphones clamped on his head, was figuring accounts. He did not stop to answer when he heard MWL Continental Morris for the nearby Leland liner Californian calling the Titanic. The Californian had some message about 3 icebergs. He didn't bother, then, to take it down. About 1:42 p.m., the rasping spark of those days spoke again across the water. It was the Baltic calling the Titanic, warning her of ice on the steamer track. Bride took the message down and sent it up to the bridge. The officer of the deck glanced at it, sent it to the bearded master of the Titanic, Captain E.C. Smith, a veteran of the White Star Service. It was lunchtime then. The captain, walking along the promenade deck, saw Mr. Ismay, stopped and handed him the message without comment. Ismay read it, stuffed it in his pocket, told 2 ladies about the icebergs, and resumed his walk. Later, about 7:15 p.m., the captain requested the return of the message in order to post it in the chart room for the information of the officers. Dinner that night in the Jacobean dining room was gay. It was bitter on deck, but the night was calm and fine. The sky was moonless, but studded with stars twinkling coldly in the clean air. After dinner, some of the second-class passengers gathered in the saloon, where the Reverend Mr. Carter conducted a hymn sing-song. It was almost 10 o'clock, and the stewards were waiting with biscuits and coffee as the group sang, "Oh, hear us when we cry to thee, for those in peril on the sea." On the bridge, Second Officer Lightoller, short, stocky, efficient, was relieved at 10 o'clock by First Officer Murdoch. Lightoller had talked with other officers about the proximity of ice. At least 5 wireless ice warnings had reached the ship. Lookouts had been cautioned to be alert. Captains and officers expected to reach the field at any time. After 9:30 p.m. At 22 knots, its speed unslackened, the Titanic plowed on through the night. Lightoller left the darkened bridge to his relief and turned in. Captain Smith went to his cabin. The steerage was long since quiet. In the first and second cabins, lights were going out. Voices were growing still. People were asleep. Murdoch paced back and forth on the bridge, peering out over the dark water, glancing now and then at the compass in front of Quartermaster Hinchins at the wheel. In the crow's nest, lookout Frederick Fleet and his partner Lee gazed down at the water, still and unruffled in the dim, starlit darkness. Behind and below them, the ship a white shadow with here and there a last winking light. Ahead of them was a dark and silent and cold ocean. There was a sudden clang. Dong, 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 dong. The metal clapper of the great ship's bell struck out 11:30. Mindful of the warnings, Fleet strained his eyes, searching the darkness for the dreaded ice. But there were only the stars and the sea. In the wireless room, where Philip's first operator had relieved Bride, the buzz of the Californian said again crackled into the earphones. Californian: "Say, old man, we are stuck here, surrounded by ice." Titanic: "Shut up, keep out. I am talking to Cape Race. You are jamming my signals." Then a few minutes later, about 11:40, Part 2. Out of the dark she came, a vast, dim, white, monstrous shape directly in the Titanic's path. For a moment, Fleet doubted his eyes. But she was a deadly reality, this ghastly thing. Frantically, Fleet struck 3 bells, something dead ahead. He snatched the telephone and called the bridge. "Iceberg, right ahead!" The first officer heard, but did not stop to acknowledge the message. "Hard a starboard!" Hitchins strained at the wheel. The bow swung slowly to the port. The monster was almost upon them now. Murdoch leaped to the engine room telegraph. Bells clanged. Far below in the engine room, those bells struck the first warning. "Danger!" The indicators on the dial faces swung round to "Stop!" Then full speed astern. Frantically, the engineers turned great valve wheels, answered the bridge bells. There was a slight shock, a brief scraping, a small list to port. Shell ice, slabs and chunks of it, fell on the foredeck. Slowing, the Titanic stopped. Captain Smith hurried out of his cabin. "What has the ship struck?" Murdoch answered, "An iceberg. I hard starboarded and reversed the engines, and I was going hard a port around it, but she was too close. I could not do any more. I have closed the watertight doors." Fourth Officer Boxhall, other officers, the carpenter came to the bridge. The captain sent Boxhall and the carpenter below to ascertain the damage. A few lights switched on in the first and second cabins. Sleepy passengers peered through porthole glass. Some casually asked the stewards, "Why have we stopped?" "I don't know, sir, but I don't suppose it has anything much." In the smoking room, a quorum of gamblers and their prey were still sitting around the poker table. The usual crowd of kibitzers looked on. They had felt the slight jar of the collision and had seen an 80-foot ice mountain glide by the smoking room windows. But the night was calm and clear. The Titanic was unsinkable. They hadn't bothered to go on deck. But far below, in the warren of passengers on the starboard side forward, in the forward holes and boiler rooms, men could see that the Titanic's hurt was mortal. In number 6 boiler room, where the red glow from the furnaces lighted up the naked, sweaty chests of coal-blackened firemen, water was pouring through a great gash about 2 feet above the floor plates. This was no slow leak. The ship was open to the sea. In 10 minutes, they were 8 feet of water in number 6, long. Before then, the stokers had raked the flaming fires out of the furnaces and had scrambled through the watertight doors in number 5, or had climbed up the long steel ladders to safety. When Boxhall looked at the mailroom in number 3 hold, 24 feet above the keel, the mailbags were already floating around in the slushing water. In number 5 boiler room, a stream of water spurted into an empty bunker. All 6 compartments forward of number 4 were open to the sea. In 10 seconds, the iceberg's jagged claw had ripped a 300-foot slash in the bottom of the great Titanic. Reports came to the bridge. Ismay, in dressing gown, ran out on deck. In the cold, still, starlit night, climbed up on the bridge ladder. "What has happened?" "Captain Smith, we have struck ice." "Do you think she is seriously damaged?" "Captain Smith, I'm afraid she is." Ismay went below and passed Chief Engineer William Bell, fresh from an inspection of the damaged compartments. Bell corroborated the captain's statement, hurried back down the glistening steel ladders to his duty. Man after man followed him. Thomas Andrews, one of the ship's designers, Archie Frost, the builder's chief engineer, and his 20 assistants, men who had no posts of duty in the engine room, but whose traditions called them there. On deck, in corridor and stateroom, life flowed again. Men, women, and children awoke and questioned. Orders were given to uncover the lifeboats. Water rose into the firemen's quarters. Half-dressed stokers streamed up on deck. But the passengers, most of them, did not know that the Titanic was sinking. The shock of the collision had been so slight that some were not awakened by it. The Titanic was so huge that she must be unsinkable. The night was too calm, too beautiful, to think of death at sea. Captain Smith half ran to the door of the radio shack. Bride, partly dressed, eyes dulled with sleep, was standing behind Phillips, waiting. "Send the call for assistance." The blue spark danced. "CQD, CQD, CQD, CQ." Miles away, Macaroni Men heard. Cape Race heard it, and the steamships La Provence and Mount Temple. The sea was surging into the Titanic's hold. At 12:20, the water burst into the seamen's quarters through a collapsed fore and aft wooden bulkhead. Pumps strained to the engine rooms, men and machinery making a futile fight against the sea. Steadily the water rose. The boats were swung out slowly, for the deckhands were late in reaching their stations. There had been no boat drill, and many of the crew did not know what boats they were assigned. Orders were shouted. The safety valves had lifted, and the steam was blowing off in great rushing roar. In the chart house, 4th Officer Boxhall bent above a chart, working rapidly with pencil and dividers. 12:25 a.m. Boxhall's position is sent out to the fleet of vessels. "Come at once. We have struck a berg." To the connoiter Carpathia, Arthur Henry Rostron, master, New York to Liverpool, 58 miles away. "It's a CQD, old man. Position 41 to 46 north, 50 to 14 west." The blue spark dancing, "Sinking. Cannot hear for a noise of steam." 12:30 a.m. The word is passed. Women and children in the boats. Stewards finish waking their passengers below. Life preservers are tied on. Some men smile at the precaution. The Titanic is unsinkable. The Mount Temple starts for the Titanic. The Carpathia, with a double watch in her stockholds, radios, "Coming hard." The CQD changes the course of many ships, but not of one. The operator of the Californian, nearby, had just put down its earphones and turned in. The CQD flashes over land and sea from Cape Race to New York. Newspaper city rooms leap to life and presses whir. On the Titanic, water creeps over the bulkhead between numbers 5 and 6 fire rooms. She is going down by the head. The engineers, fighting a losing battle, are forced back foot by the rising water. Down the promenade deck, happy Jock Hume, the bandsman, runs with his instrument. 12:45, Murdoch, in charge on the starboard side, eyes tragic but calm and cool, orders boats number 7 lowered. The women hang back. The women hang back. They want no boat ride on an ice-strewn sea. The Titanic is unsinkable. The men encourage them. Explain that this is just a precautionary measure. We'll see you again at breakfast. There is a little confusion. Passengers stream slowly to the boat deck. In the steerage, the immigrants chatter excitedly. A sudden sharp hiss, a streaked flare against the night. Boxhall sends a rocket towards the sky. It explodes, and a parachute of white stars lights up the icy sea. God, rockets! The band plays ragtime. Number 8 is lowered, and number 5, Ismay, still in dressing gowns, calls for women and children, handles lines, stumbles in the way of an officer, is told to get the hell out of here. Third Officer Pittman takes charge of number 5 as he swings into the boat. Murdoch grasps his hand. "Goodbye and good luck, old man." Number 6 goes over the side. There are only 28 people in a lifeboat with a capacity of 65. A light stabs from the bridge. Boxhall is calling in Morse flashes again and again to a strange ship stopped in the ice jam 5 to 10 miles away. Another rocket drops. It showers of sparks above the ice-strewn sea and the dying ship. 1:00 a.m. Slowly the water creeps higher. The 4 parts of the Titanic are dipping into the sea. Rope squeaks through blocks. Lifeboats drop jerkily seaward. The shouting on the decks comes the sound of a band playing ragtime. The Millionaire's Special leaves the ship. Boat number 1, with a capacity of 40 people, carries only Sir Cosmo and Lady Duff Gordon and 10 others. Aft, the frightened immigrants mill and jostle and rush for a boat. An officer's fist flies out, 3 shots are fired in the air, and the panic is quelled. 4 Chinese sneak unseen into a boat and hide in the bottom. 1:20 a.m. Water is coming into number 4 boiler room. Stokers slice and shovel as water laps onto their ankles. Steam for the dynamos, steam for the dancing spark. As the water rises, great ash hose rake the flaming coals from the furnaces. Safety valves pop, the stokers retreat aft, and the watertight doors clang shut behind them. The rockets fling their splendor toward the stars. The boats are more heavily loaded now, for the passengers know the Titanic is sinking. Women cling and sob, though the great screws aft are rising clear of the sea. Half-filled boats are ordered to come alongside the cargo ports and take on more passengers, but the ports are never opened, and the boats are never filled. Others pull from the steamer's light miles away but never reach it. The lights disappear, the unknown ship steams off. The water rises, and the band plays ragtime. 1:30 a.m. Light Oller is getting the port boats off. Murdoch, the starboard. As one boat is lowered into the sea, a boat officer fires his gun along the ship's side to stop a rush from the lower decks. A woman tries to take her Great Dane into a boat with her. She is refused and steps out of the boat to die with her dog. Millet's little smile, which played on his lips all through the voyage, plays no more. His lips are grim, but he waves goodbye and brings wraps for the women. Benjamin Guggenheim, in evening clothes, smiles and says, "We've dressed up in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." 1:40 a.m. Boat 14 is clear, and then 13, 16, 15, and C. The lights still shine, but the Baltic hears the blue sparks say, "Engine room getting flooded." The Olympia signals, "Am lighting up all possible boilers as fast as can." Major Butt helps women into the last boats and waves goodbye to them. Mrs. Strauss puts her foot on the gunwale of a lifeboat. Then she draws back and goes to her husband. "We have been together many years. Where you go, I will go." Colonel Jacob Astor puts his young wife in a lifeboat, steps back, taps cigarette on fingernail. "Goodbye, dearie. I'll join you later."